Your hand stopped hurting about 2 hours ago. That is your body giving up on sending the message because the message was not helping. The oar is still there. The sea is still there. The man in front of you leans back, so you lean back, since breaking the rhythm is something the whole boat feels in its spine. You are 17. You have been rowing since before the sun came up. Nobody around you thinks anything unusual is happening. This is simply how a person gets from one place to another in this world, and it is where the answer starts. On a bench, with hands too numb to hurt. The strength was a bill. They paid it daily, starting at about 6 years old. Now the boat, because the boat explains most of it. In 1962, 5 ships were lifted out of the seabed at Skulev in the Roskilde Fjord in Denmark, where they had been sunk deliberately 9 centuries earlier to block a channel against attack. One of them, which archaeologists call Skulev II, was a warship just under 30 meters long, built for 60 oars. Tree-ring analysis of the oak produced a result nobody expected, because the timber had not grown in Denmark at all. It was felled around the year 1042 in Ireland, near Dublin. So the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde built the ship again using period methods, launched it in 2004, and in the summer of 2007 crewed it and sailed it back to Dublin. 65 people. When the wind died, those 65 people were the engine. They slept on an open deck, in the cold and the wet, with no shelter and no privacy, and then they got up and did it again. The museum published the ship's logs, and this is the part that stays with you. The nurse on board, Susanna Malmström, kept the medical diary, and reading it is nothing whatsoever like reading a saga. Somebody slips on the wet deck and collects a mass of blood under the knee. Somebody has an infection between 2 toes that has to be opened with a scalpel. Somebody grows a red ring around a tick bite. Somebody visits a stand-in dentist on an island. And on the 17th of July, when the weather had beaten them and the ship had to accept a tow from a motor vessel, her entry for the day is 1 sentence long. Spirits low since we have to take a tow. That is the real cost of the boat, and that is with modern food, modern medicine, and a support vessel a few 100 meters away. So who could get onto that bench in the first place? The bones answer at Repton in Derbyshire in England between 1980 and 1986. The archaeologists Martin Biddle and Birta Kjølby Biddle excavated a low mound in a vicarage garden and found, packed into the ruins of an old Anglo-Saxon building underneath it, the jumbled bones of at least 264 people. Coins in the deposit dated to the years 872 to 875, which covers the winter the Viking Great Army spent at Repton. Around 80% of the dead were men, most of them between 18 and 45, which leaves the other 20%. Roughly 1 in 5 of those 264 was a woman. Warriors, wives, camp followers, captives, I have believed all 4 of those at various points, sometimes in the same afternoon, which is a long way of admitting I have no idea what they were doing with an army in an English winter. Nobody knows. It has been sitting there since 1986. Then there is Ridgeway Hill, outside Weymouth in Dorset. In June 2009, road construction cut into an old quarry pit and found 54 dismembered skeletons, with 51 skulls stacked in a pile to one side. 54 bodies, 51 heads. 3 of them are simply gone. And while people have suggested trophies or heads put on spikes, the truthful answer is that we do not know. And that small gap of 3 is the loudest thing on the site. Isotope analysis, which reads the chemical fingerprint your childhood drinking water leaves in your tooth enamel forever, showed these men grew up in Scandinavia and around the North Atlantic. Radiocarbon dating puts the killing somewhere between about 970 and 1025. They were young, most of them barely into their 20s. And then the story turns on itself. Louise Lowe of Oxford Archaeology, who worked on the remains and co-edited the published report, has noted that a striking number of these men were carrying infections and physical impairments. Bad teeth. Bodies already fighting something. These were not action figures. They were young men who had been used hard and then, one afternoon, been executed by people who had had enough of them. What the bones do record, over and over, is load. Bone is living tissue that answers demand. Work it repeatedly and it thickens. And the places where big muscles anchor grow rough and pronounced from being pulled on for years. A skeleton is a slow recording of what a life asked of a body. And the Viking Age skeletons read as people whose lives asked constantly, not seasonally, and never as training. That life starts far earlier than most people picture. You are 6 and you are already working, not helping in a decorative way, but carrying water, which weighs about 1 kilogram per liter and does not come out of a tap. You are hauling firewood, you are dragging feed, you are 8 and you are handling livestock, and a cow has no interest in your body weight. You are 11, and you are in the fields with iron tools, cutting and digging and lifting, and you are grinding grain by hand on a rotary quern, which is a shoulder and forearm workout that runs for hours and then comes back tomorrow. You are 14, and the adults have quietly stopped adjusting the work to fit you. Nobody here has a rest day in the sense you mean. Winter changes the tasks without removing them. There is no chair, no commute spent sitting still, no stretch of the day where the body is simply idle and supported. By 20, the physique is not a project anybody undertook. It is residue. Fuel matters too, because you cannot build any of this on nothing. Viking Age Scandinavia had an unusually protein-rich food supply for medieval Europe. Fish in enormous quantity from a coastline and rivers full of it. Dairy from cattle, sheep, and goats in a population with among the highest rates of lactase persistence in the world, meaning the genetic ability to keep digesting milk sugar into adulthood, which northern Scandinavians still have. Meat when available, barley and oats for calories. Isotope studies on Viking Age remains, including material from the Swedish trading town of Birka, show diets with a serious marine component running through them. Heavy load from early childhood, plus enough protein to actually recover from it. That is the whole formula, and it has never been more complicated than that. Now let me take something away from you. There was no Viking race of giants. The bioarchaeologist Anna Källström and colleagues at Stockholm University have worked extensively on Scandinavian skeletal material, including the graves at Birka, and the picture from these collections is of adult men averaging somewhere around 172 centimeters, a shade under 5'8". A little above the medieval European average in some samples, and nothing more than that. In 2020, a genomic study led by Ashot Margarian with Eska Villeslev sequenced 442 Viking Age individuals from across the Viking world, and the results cut straight through the pop culture image. There was substantial genetic diversity, with ancestry arriving from Southern Europe and from Asia, and plenty of people buried with full Viking material culture who were not homogeneously Scandinavian at all. Being a Viking described what you did, not what you were born as. And the berserkers, the warriors who supposedly fought in an unstoppable frenzy, immune to pain and iron? Nearly everything we have comes from Icelandic sagas and from Snorri Sturluson, writing in the 13th century, which is 200 years and more after the fact. And the famous theory that they were dosing themselves on fly agaric mushrooms is not an Old Norse tradition at all. A Swedish theologian named Samuel Ödman floated it in 1784 as a guess with no evidence, and it has been repeated confidently ever since. I find that genuinely irritating, and I think it does the real people a disservice because the actual explanation is better. Nobody needed a mushroom. They had a lifetime of work in their arms and a boat full of men who would notice if they hesitated. The typical Viking Age Scandinavian was a farmer. Raiding was seasonal, carried out by a minority, and slotted around an agricultural calendar. The strength came from farming, hauling, sailing, and surviving northern winters, and it simply happened to transfer very well when those sane people put a boat in the water and went somewhere unwelcome. And it cost them. The same skeletons that show all that loading also show worn joints, degenerative damage in spines and shoulders in people nowhere near old, healed fractures, and teeth ground flat by stone-milled grain.
Bodies run at the limit for decades by people who often never saw 50. Now come back. You live in a world that has stripped nearly every physical demand out of your day and then sells the demand back to you. In 1-hour blocks, in a building with mirrors. You lift a weight and set it down exactly where you found it. Nothing has been moved, nothing has been carried anywhere. That is one of the great achievements of civilization, that your survival no longer rests on your shoulders, and I would not trade it back. But it explains the mystery, and the answer is almost disappointing in how ordinary it is. They had your skeleton, your muscle fibers, and the same capacity for adaptation sitting inside you right now, unused. Their life never once let them off the hook, and yours lets you off constantly. Your body is not weaker than theirs. It has simply never been asked. Your hands stopped hurting a long time ago, and you never noticed the moment they stopped being asked to.